It can't be just those of us who live here who become aware. I think the whole state needs to become aware. It's going to get worse. I think we're headed to a very significant decision point as a species.
That's a little pod of fish down right off that grassy point. See that movement down there? There's a dark line. These little marsh ponds out here on the right, filled and empty. Ooh, baby. Okay, we're fishing now. It was truly paradise. That's my view of what Rockport was. I could take you to any spot out here and there would be redfish there. And there would be areas of massive schools of redfish, 100 yards long and 30 yards wide, and somehow magically they disappeared. Previously, I thought the vegetation was the one item we had to protect against all others. And when I got into this issue, I was going like, no, I'm wrong. It's the dang oyster reefs that you cannot see that are protecting this resource.
We know that oysters are filter feeders, and as they filter the water, they make it clean and clear and a nice place to live and a nice place to fish. We also know that they can protect shorelines. So an oyster reef, essentially, if it's oriented parallel to a shoreline, is like a natural breakwater. And so when storms come through or wind and waves, it can help break up that energy before it hits our coastlines. There are places that we go out to that we've been monitoring for 15 years that now don't have oysters on them anymore. And it feels like that's happening too fast. So there's clearly something going on.
There's oyster boats, and there's the plume from their dredge changing the water from clear to cloudy. And this is only like 11 boats here. When you get 80 of them concentrated in a given reef, it's pretty easy to see the impact of strip mining our base.
As a hydrographic surveyor, there was a good chunk of my career, literally we're just on the water surveying every single day. The amount of change that's happening isn't good. The wild oyster dredging, all of this stuff is man-induced. They go to one reef, they just harvest it until it's functionally out of oysters, right? Like till they can't pick up any more market-sized oysters in their dredge. And what they're doing is physically dragging an oyster dredge. It has these teeth that drag through the bay bottom, so it disrupts the entire reef structure, all the mud and sediment, other organisms that are living on the reef.
It's taking a public resource and converting it for their financial gain. I'm so accustomed to waking up at 2 o'clock in the dang morning. I've done that for years, ever since I got into this battle. I go to bed early and I wake up about 2 and I go like, okay, now what I need to do. Now I bless John and Keith with the same disease.
I was out on a guided trip and saw the oyster boats. I don't know the numbers, 60, 70, circling on a reef. And I went home that night and I was like, am I gonna be upset or am I gonna do something about this? And I was in your living room the next day.
You were.
And then I was in Austin at the Parks and Wildlife Commissioners meeting, giving my point of view on that experience. And within that week up in Austin, that's when I met John as well.
We were both up there. We were both going to speak. The full story is that in 2005, the legislature decided that there were too many oyster licenses, and so they put a moratorium on issuing any more. And then these fishermen were politically very well connected, and they said, okay, we need a 1-year moratorium. And they got it. There were 300 already. In that 1 year, they added another 400.
Galveston and Trinity Bay had probably the largest and most robust oyster reefs in the state. So there was never a need for any of those wild dredgers to leave. The reefs were like seemingly endless, right? As things seem, until they're not.
The real protection for the ecosystem comes from the reef height. If that reef height is there, statistically, it will mitigate 96% of the wave action. If you don't attenuate the waves, erosion will take over, and that's the problem. What the commercial fishermen did was they went out there and they flattened the reefs.
When the natural reefs, which are generally looking much more like a mound shape, get chopped off or topped off, or they lose that height, it tends to experience really substantial sedimentation. And that sediment can smother and cover a living oyster reef, which obviously covers the organisms that lives on it, but it also importantly covers that really important shell material that's needed for the younger generations of oysters to attach themselves onto and to keep the reef going.
Hurricane Ike came through. The reefs did not have any structural integrity with which to withstand the storm, and the mud flow that came in covered up the reefs, and they died.
They're functionally out of oysters to dredge up there.
I think the frustrating part of this is that industry is concerned with one thing: how many oysters they can sell. And their view, in my way of thinking, is short term. It just fires me up to just keep hammering away at them and tell them, y'all just don't realize the damage that you're doing.
There's 15 major rivers going over a vast landscape in the state of Texas. Fertilizer runoff, sewage, leakage that's going on. It all ends up in our rivers, and then it flows south into our bays and estuaries. The oyster forgives our sins. I always go back to, like, what's the one thing we can do down here on the coast? And it's put more oysters in the water.
This is considered one of the most sustainable forms of food production in the world. The oysters are out here with no inputs from us as far as like fertilizer or irrigation or chemicals.
TOMA is an organization that's by the farmers for the farmers. It's called the Texas Oyster Mariculture Association. I helped set it up, but if you look at the majority of the board, they're farmers. So they're the decision makers.
We thought with our skill sets, he's a marine hydrographer, builds boats. I'm a conservation biologist. Perhaps with our skills combined, we could try to make a go at setting up our own farm. And I think, yeah, when we saw that Texas was finally allowing folks to have this more sustainable form of oyster production, we thought, well, this is a win-win all around. A lot of times they are growing with like deeper cups and plumper meat. And they're also cleaner. They're growing cleaner because they're at the top of the water column as opposed to on the bottom. And so all of that, I think, affects the way that the oysters look, the way that they taste. And also it's a net positive for the environment. They are just feeding on the nutrients in the bay. And while they're doing that, they are providing benefits for this bay.
That entire fleet moved south. I drove over the Coconut Bay Causeway, and I'm like, wait, what is happening? Like, I didn't understand. We used to see oyster boats, but it'd be like 10.
After the demise of Galveston Bay, they just progressively moved down. The Matagorda Bay, Espiritu Santo Bay, San Antonio Bay, all the way down to Aransas and Copano.
When the whole fleet came down here, the consolidated fleet, all of a sudden, each reef would have 40 or 50 boats on it. And those boats are moving strategically from reef to reef.
A harvest turned into a pillage. All of the active oystermen came into our public reefs in numbers that we had never seen. Nobody knew how to respond to it.
That broader change in the reef morphology, the shape of the reefs, like that's done, right? At this point, we're just trying to save the remnant morphology, the remnant structure that's there. We've passed a tipping point, but there is another tipping point. Like if we keep doing this, I'm gonna say 4 or 5 years, like the reefs are entirely functionally degraded. The bays will just be muddy bathtubs.
They hang their hat on denial. We're caretakers of this. We want it to be healthy. Well, what is healthy? You know, healthy to you is a sack full of damn money, and healthy to me is a resource that supports life in all aspects. A resource that can provide enjoyment to the people of this state.
I said, I must give this a shot. I know I can make a difference. I need to figure out how to do that. There is a program called the Certificate of Location. It is a lease on a bay bottom from the state of Texas. There haven't been any issued since the 1950s.
The COL gives the owner the exclusive right to harvest on his private property. And it gives him the ability to go in and properly manage that for the health of that system without outside interference. To qualify for a COL, it has to meet certain criteria. And that one of those things is that it is from an area in the bay that is not currently productive of anything. No bottom vegetation, no existing oyster reef. So they're going to go into a area of sand or mud or whatever the substrate is and lease that, and they're going to turn that into a living reef with all the benefits of filtration and all the other things that a reef does, and we're going to get the benefit of that too. Not only that, but with a COL, you can harvest 12 months out of the year. So you take your ability to make money from 6 months to 12 months. Well, that's a big game changer. And it gives you a reason to be a caretaker of the resource as opposed to just someone that's coming in and being part of the pillage.
We have been successful in getting the COL program up and running again that takes active harvesting off of the public reefs and puts them on these private leases. It's a big step.
It's critical. If you think about the shoreline erosion that's going on, the fact that we're losing these baffle reefs, and I've seen data on San Jose Island that we're losing 6 to 10 foot a year. I've seen data on the west side of Copano Bay that we're losing 100 feet
That much?
over the
100
last
feet?
20 years.
Yeah. Everybody says, well, but I like to eat oysters. And I'm going like,
Yeah.
well, I like to eat oysters too.
If the leases we have now, the private COLs that we have now are producing 30%, there's only 2,300 acres of them.
Mm-hmm.
If we get another 2,000 acres in there, suddenly 60% of your oyster harvest comes from COLs. They're going to supplement it. It's going to take boats off of the public reefs and put them on these private leases.
So you're going to
30%.
have that. You've got mariculture now stepping up. And I'll guarantee you that every oyster house in this state is resourceful enough to go get oysters from somewhere else.
Plus-
Nobody's going to miss oysters.
So it's a very big agenda that we have going right now. From license buyback to supporting alternative sources of supply like cultivated oyster mariculture, supporting COLs in a sustainable way, and then doing restoration.
I love you guys and what you're doing and where your heart is. And I'm in it. I don't want anyone to think that I own any of this, because I do not. I don't own a drop of this water or a blade of that vegetation, nothing. I do want to ask that you don't harm it.
This was an old bombing and gunnery range. This is the concrete runway from the old military base. There is a lot of concrete. I put an estimate to it. There's 50 acres of this concrete.
As shells are removed from the water, as they're harvested or as reefs get sedimented over and those shells get buried, you don't have that really important structure for the baby oysters to attach to. And so now what the focus has been much more on is to try to find readily available, low cost, if possible, recyclable material, putting that out in the water at the right times of year and in the right places. Then it's sort of, if you build it, they will come.
The idea is pretty simple here. Okay, you get a breaker, you get a loader, you put it into a hopper, and you crush it to the size you want, and then haul it from here to the dock, load it onto a barge, and then barge it to the locations that we want. All of the substrate leads to surface area to where young oyster can attach and grow. And that's how you restore it. That's the idea.
The only way to get anything done is to start something.
That's right.
So
Get going.